Recently, Charles Hicks ran a 2:04:35 marathon, placing as one of the top finishers at the 2026 Boston Marathon. And he's coached, or at least partially coached, by Alex Ostberg, who is a frequent appearance on the Running Effect podcast. He also happens to write a newsletter for me in the Running Effect community called The Rundown by the Running Effect, written by Alex himself. I leave a link in every single episode description, but pertaining to today's conversation, Alex wrote a piece this past Thursday, completely free of charge for you to check out, inside Charles Hicks's 2:04 marathon, where he breaks down 10 different insights that went into Charles's 2:04 breakthrough performance. So I thought it'd be a cool idea. I think it was actually Alex's idea to do a three-way podcast between the three of us and break down Charles' career, his mindset, this 2:04 marathon performance, what he thinks he can do in the future, as well as their coach-athlete collaborative relationship. It's actually quite cool. They both ran for Stanford back in the day. Alex was taking a fifth year at Stanford when Charles was a freshman. And so from teammates to now coach and athlete, and Charles being one of the fastest American marathoners in history and only his second appearance at the distance. Big future ahead. We break down it all in today's conversation. I'll keep this intro short for the sake of time and you guys enjoying the conversation. But please subscribe to the newsletter, read that piece. Also, pertaining to the podcast, give us a 5-star review. It takes next to no time. Share the podcast with a friend. That is the easiest way in which we can grow. And hit the follow button for more conversations with Charles in the future, Alex in the future, and new world-class athletes every other day, or even sometimes more frequently. We are on our podcast grind these days. So without further ado, enjoy the conversation with newly minted 2:04 marathoner Charles Hicks and his world-class coach, Alex Ostberg. Alex Ostberg, Charles Hicks, the coach and the talent. Welcome to the podcast. Alex, we'll start with you. Charles seemingly has a perfect block, runs 2:09 last fall at New York, sneaks under sub 2:10, first go at it. World kind of starts to converge, start talking about this new marathon talent. What was the conversation like internally between you and him, even Jerry or other people on the team? Okay, what's the next mark? Is it Boston? Is it London? And how'd you guys settle on Boston?
I actually think we should probably rewind the clock a little bit further. I think the first proof of concept race for him was really the Cherry Blossom 10 miler in Washington, D.C., which was April of 2025. Prior to that, Charles had taken like nearly a year off of racing and had just tried to get battle tested, like getting used to the roads, and then ran 4:30 pace for 10 miles, set the American record, well, I guess British born American record at that race. And I think that was the first like leading indicator that there really was going to be some potential. We then entered New York. We didn't really want to shortchange the rest period after his, what was his spring training. So into the summer, we took like an appropriate amount of time off. And then we had a pretty abbreviated build prior to New York, where he only really was doing workouts and high mileage for like 8 weeks or so. Goes and runs 2:09 in New York, which was at the time, like, I think that exceeded all of our expectations. And then we just started asking the question, if he could do that off of that kind of build, like, we know the levers we want to pull right now. Can we be like significantly better? I still don't think 2:04 would have registered in any of our collective minds, but I think it made sense. Like, if you're a marathoner, you're probably going to target 2 key races throughout the course of the year. So we knew the winter build was going to culminate in Boston, and we were really excited to try some new things in training and then see what the results would be on race day.
And what I'm hearing here, Charles, is you start to race well and do well after you change citizenship. I think that's fascinating how that works.
It was a corporate alignment strategy, and just sometimes when you optimize correctly, you become more efficient, right? And I think it's funny reflecting on all these training blocks, because I do agree with Berg that it did all start for sure in Cherry Blossom, in the sense that coming off of that race was when we were certain. I think even if New York hadn't gone as well or Boston hadn't gone as well, I would still take that Cherry Blossom performance and think that like it could go well at some point. It's just more of a matter of time. I think what's been so unexpected is kind of the timeline has just continually, including with Cherry Blossom, just been accelerated. We were always, I think, kind of operating from the idea that youth being one of my greatest advantages, we have, I think the best thing we have with that is many opportunities to kind of figure it out. And what we're kind of dealing with now is almost the opposite, I think, experience, where it's like we're kind of just rewriting the playbook after every race, I think, to kind of be more aggressive, take some of these positive performances into account and kind of figure out, if the sky's the limit.
Oh, the sky is always the limit. Absolutely to that. I do want to start a little earlier on, and we'll dive into Boston and some of your current training mindset moving forward from this. Let's go freshman year, Charles, because the upperclassmen on the team, you had 1 year with Alex, if I'm not mistaken, which is kind of hilarious. So what were your first impressions of Alex? And at that time and moment, did you ever think he'd be your coach and one of the leading forces to you running 204 in the marathon of all things?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely 1000% iterated before Berg was a coach that he would be a phenomenal coach. Because I remember even as a little freshman, we had definitely a couple runs. One that was pretty significant, which actually was with another current teammate, Thomas Ratcliffe, where we had a long run where our coach at the time, Ricardo Santos, had given us, I think, some kind of prescriptive cut down pace. And I'd kind of, I think, jumped up above what maybe I was supposed to be doing, but I was just having so much fun running with Berg and Thomas, and it was a long run, which funnily enough, I think ended up being kind of my forte. And I was hanging with these guys who at the time had very outsized, I would say, levels of performance compared to where I was as a freshman. And also I distinctly remember a couple runs where I would just really pick Berg's brain on a lot of things. One of them I remember super distinctly being altitude tents, which is kind of funny because they were so new to me at the time. I mean, I bought one right before I got to Stanford. And so I was just still trying to figure out so much of this stuff that's now, I think, crystallized into something really, really incredible. But all the way back when, it's very similar to what I think we do really well nowadays, which is just if I have a question about something, odds are Berg's researched it forwards and backwards.
And Alex, for you, what do you remember about Charles? Might I add, Charles, you were, and I've talked to you about this before, a previous podcast or just off air, like you were good in high school, but given your current present day results, it's kind of surprising how quote unquote mediocre you were in high school. So obviously you ran for Stanford and you got to Stanford, but a 204 guy, or let's just say an NCAA champion in cross, you would expect kind of a Nico Young-esque high school career where you're setting the world on fire. You were always in the teens at NXN. Alex,
and
do you
a pretty
remember?
good way to phrase it is I was certainly not the first guy to get my Stanford application in high school. It's ordered by kind of coach's priority. And we were all in a group chat texting. And I think I was like the fifth or sixth guy in my grade. There were 7 guys total to get my pink slip is what it was called back then. And I think that showing that I barely made the cross country roster of my incoming grade was a pretty outsized performances that I'm running now.
100%. So Alex, the 5th best guy, incoming freshman to Stanford, in Charles's words, most important. You wrote this piece that we'll talk about sort of in today's conversation for the newsletter that you write for me, the rundown that you write. I'll leave a link. I leave a link in every single show notes. And you talk about these different points. I think there are 9 of them, maybe 10 of them, about sort of what went into a 204 marathon. But the 1 year you had with Charles, what would those, and you don't have to share all 10 off the top of your head, but what would a few of those points be about Charles as a freshman? Do you see similar characteristics between present day Charles and freshman year Charles when you knew him?
Yeah, one thing I specifically remember, so I was a 5th year at the time, this would have been the 2019 cross country season. And we were always like playing around with the roster and who we were going to pull the red shirt from, like who was going to race and who wasn't going to race. And I remember at the time we were coming off a series of years where we had been on the podium and had been in contention for the win and obviously really wanted to keep that streak going. And I recall like Charles was like starting to look a lot better in workouts. Charles, I remember you and Ryan Oosting did like a 4-mile like progressive tempo around the IM fields. And Santos had you guys do that. And like, you just kind of like blew the doors off like the last couple miles. And we're like, whoa, like there might be something there. I think one of our biggest regrets, I talked about this with Stephen Fahey, NCAA champion in the steeplechase, and also a great runner at Stanford. He said his biggest regret was like not really pushing for Charles to race that season. Like he's like, he should not have redshirted. Like he was capable of something that could have absolutely contributed to our team score and probably would have helped us maybe even contend for a national title. So I always believe that greatness it has a scent before it has a resume. That's how I like to think about it. And champions behave like champions before they become champions. And you could see little glimpses of it with Charles back in 2019. But I also think, and this I think lends itself to the kind of the marathon conversation and the athlete that he's built himself into. I knew version 1.0 of Charles. I firmly believe that a lot of the decision making that went into like what he did during the pandemic fundamentally changed like his athletic and physiological characteristics moving forward. And I think the decision to just like really hit the mileage hard, to like take a jump that like, he was obviously conscious of the risks involved. But going from like, 50 to 80 to 85 miles, like was maybe not necessarily like the logical jump that you would have assumed, but he just built his life and his circadian rhythm around training and running mileage. And I think he came out of it the other side totally different.
What do you guys remember post Cherry Blossom race, your first big road race? Was there a conversation thereafter about, okay, you nailed the 10-mile distance, let's add on 16.2, or was that sort of a gradual conversation with the next training block?
Yeah, that is, it's kind of working backwards. I think the marathon was the first thing that was decided. So when Jerry, he kind of came to me, we had a meeting and it was kind of about, I think it was really just about like what I wanted to do in regards to his theory that I could be a very strong marathon runner, but it's kind of a question of when, right? And it was, I think it kind of popped into his head or something that if we wanted to do it in LA in 2028, then there wasn't really as much time as you'd think to kind of prepare for that. If you even wanted to race another year, I mean, you think about how long it's taken me just to get 2 marathons done. And we made this decision back in 2024. It's like, the marathon is got a long corrective, I think time prescripted to it, where if you want to make a decision around it, you better plan pretty far out in advance. And so I think Cherry Blossom was really more of just how big of a bite can we take out of this distance that gives us an idea of whether or not we want to commit more resources. And running time is pretty much the most valuable resource you have. So I think that was what set us up so well to be in the position I'm in today, is because we were able to figure out that the answer was yes from Cherry Blossom, that we did want to commit to this. I didn't have to expend more time in that kind of intermediate zone. We got to kind of shift gears. We kind of just finished out the year through the summer because we knew that wasn't really a marathon we wanted to target until the fall. And then we did that super aggressive New York build, which I would say was probably built off, the back of that long road running adjusted year, just solid, not super high, but 100 to 110 mile weeks. And then just eked up into the 115s before New York. And then that gave us even more inertia, I would say. And then we just kept, I think we put our foot fully on the throttle heading into Boston.
Scary to be a guy named Cole Sprout. If you're listening, it sounds like a very similar path going on that Alex, you have cooked up for him.
Yeah. Cole's next race is probably going to be a marathon or a tune-up half marathon in service of a marathon. That's what we're talking about right now. We're still trying to work through the race selection process and figure that out, but it's probably going to be at a similar time to Charles's next marathon because we want to keep them on the same cycle, or at least a pretty similar cycle.
For you both, but whoever wants to take the question, or both of you, we talked about sort of the shorter build going into New York. Alex, I remember texting you maybe a few days before and then after the result, because I remember thinking like, if you break 210, and we can have this discussion now, 210 is kind of, I don't know, the new like 205 for Americans. A lot has changed in the last 6 months. But at the time, breaking 210 was like a massive deal. And I remember you, Alex, saying something that you just said in this podcast of like, it was kind of off a pretty short build. And so you were curious to see what he could do off of a longer build. Loyal followers of Charles Hicks on Instagram will know that you've been, Charles, like ripping long runs in a heavy block for quite some time now. You had a tune-up race, half marathon, Alex, that you write about in the newsletter edition. What do you think the longer block did for you, as well as just like having a marathon and a marathon block underneath your legs?
I would say that the longer block, it's funny because, I think you have a retrospective and a real answer, meaning when I think back after the successful race, it's like, oh, it was the best block ever. It was so good. And we need to do that every single time. And I do think that's true. But I'd say what was so interesting was that I think because New York was very good, there was certainly an opportunity there to attach myself to it with golden handcuffs, and think, because that went so much better than I think I was expecting at the time. We don't need to iterate, we don't need to improve, and we don't need to change anything. And I think that's a very normal and very intelligently informed impulse to have when you have something that you're really happy with. I think you want to protect it. But I think, to give my coaches full credit, they were like, I think, there's just more to be mined out of that training process with more time, and I offered, I would say, a little bit of a higher mileage bump that on paper didn't look super significant, but when you measured it out over the extended duration of the training block, I mean, we came into that race with 1,000 more miles run total block for block compared to New York. And I remember texting Berg very, very distinctly and saying, if I didn't race as well as New York, we'd find out that the training was all for nothing. And unfortunately, for me, training really hard is productive. And so I think that's one of the biggest things I'm taking away from it is not necessarily just the real lessons that we learned that were all so incredibly positive, but also the fact that just because you did something good doesn't mean you should let it get in the way of doing something great.
Yeah. And if I could piggyback off of that, Charles, it's funny how you said there's kind of two different perspectives, the retrospective and then, how you're experiencing it in the moment. In psychology, there's this idea of the experiencing self and the remembering self. And those perspectives are always different, right? Because you now look back and you can canonize the plan and assume that everything was perfect. But of course, there were some moments during the build that we were testing ourselves a little bit. And the reality of any marathon build is that you're constantly negotiating with fatigue. And I think one of the things that I can speak to when we look at Charles and this marathon build is everyone has the plan written out on paper. We have the 16-ish week build starting from what was around January 1st until April 20th, pretty mapped out. But what you have to consider is there's I think training needs to be a lot more responsive than it is prescriptive. There's going to be emergent properties of a plan. There's going to be unforeseen circumstances that pop up on February 15th or March 15th that you could never have anticipated. And I think one of Charles's strongest attributes as an athlete is how he navigates those difficult moments with rationality and logic. He said to me something last year that has always stuck with me, which is when you're in a training hole, you have to reach for the ladder and not the shovel. And then it's just I have re-quoted that 100 times since, because athletes are insecure overachievers. They're always going to want to do more and think that hard work solves more problems. But I think when Charles gets to these inflection points that are really decisive, where most athletes will sometimes double down on their disadvantage and push themselves further into that hole, he just has this incredible ability to take a step back and be like, what do I actually need right now? And another thing I read about in the newsletter is there's a huge difference between training to gain fitness and training to prove fitness. You don't need to go through a block and just prove to your peers and your coaches what you can survive. It's all about hard work plus adaptation. Any fool can go out and run hard. That's not the challenge. The hard part is actually making sure that you're getting the adaptation that comes from the training. It's all stimulus response. And I think having that kind of head on your shoulders is what makes me feel confident that Charles can navigate almost any kind of block, because it's the decision making within the block itself that matters a lot more than the broad strokes plan or the amount of time that you dedicate to it.
I think you've written about this before, Alex, but the only training that matters is the training you can recover from. And I think that's a trap that a lot of people fall into. Alex, from your perspective, wearing the coach's hat or coach's clipboard or whatever would make you the coach of Charles Hicks, maybe holding his phone, recording a video for him on Instagram. What was the biggest difference? We talked about the time difference, but structurally, what did it look like in terms of creating the plan? What does that collaborative process look like between you and Jerry sitting down and saying, okay, here's the goal, here's what we want to do, and then let's work backwards from here?
Yeah, I mean, there's one driving factor really, which is that we're optimizing for mileage above all else. And Charles will speak to this too. I mean, even just the way he organizes his life is in service of just putting miles in the bank. like we talked about, we knew that he'd been at 100 plus for several years, but the amount of callousing that's required to run a good marathon is so important because your body has to withstand tens of thousands of foot strikes at like high impact velocities. And if you add into Boston, like just the hills, like the pounding down hills, then followed by Heartbreak Hill towards the second half, we just knew he was going to have to log an insane amount of mileage. And like, we can share these numbers, and like, I still feel confident that not a lot of people would be able to replicate it, because just organizing your life and your recovery around getting in 115 to 120 miles a week is extremely difficult to do. So I think the workouts themselves, there were a couple of like pretty flashy workouts for sure. But I think if there's one defining characteristics of the block, it was basically how many miles can we log close to like 110 to 115, even some higher. I mean, I remember, Charles, we were at Dorina one day, and Jerry was just like, Jerry had just done like an analysis of your past 8 weeks, and he was just like, he was salivating over it because he was so happy. He's like, Charles, I haven't seen a number below like 105 like in 8 weeks, and I'm loving it, you know? And I think just people forget, I mean, we have a bias towards intensity. Marathon specific workouts undoubtedly make a difference. We had kind of what Charles would consider to be like the arena sessions, where we go out to this reservoir 30 minutes from here, and we're just logging like usually 12 to 15 miles of work at between 440 and 450 pace. So just very marathon specific stuff. But I just think the variable that carries the most weight is volume. Mileage tends to matter most.
And that was on a kind of a different branch. One of my favorite things about, I think, the coaching setup that we have on this team is I think that there's two types of great coaches, and they're almost two different schools of thought, but I think we kind of have the best of both worlds, where there's one type of great coach that I think incurs great amounts of risk for their athletes, and being coached by them is, you know, it's exciting and it's hard, and it's I think obviously where a lot of the great work comes from. But it's also very dangerous, you know, kind of a exit the wall approach, and, you know, whatever you survive is great, and whatever you don't is necessary. And so I think the other school of thought is also coaches that I think are more focused on, I think, keeping you in the game, which I think, based on different perspectives and almost, I think, explicitly for the marathon, is just more important than anything else. Because if you drop out, then you're just going to be, when volume is the most important thing, time not training is the biggest possible hit you could have against volume. And I think that Jerry represents the first type of coach, and Berg for me represents the second, which helps me, I think, as an athlete. My natural, I think, affinity is to look as high as I possibly can, think, you know, as optimistically as I possibly can about training, but then try to mitigate the realities that I think come along with tackling some of those challenges head on. And if you can thread between the two of those effectively, I think that's where great running happens. But if you don't have access to both of those types of coaches, I think you're going to run into trouble at some point.
Alex, how far out in advance were workouts or training planned, and how do you share that with the athlete? Is it, I think I've heard stories from Jerry from old BTC athletes. It was like you line up for the workout and they tell you. So is it morning of? Is it a little bit more of a heads up?
Well, so Jerry and I talk on the phone every night before these workouts, and it's usually at like 9:30 or 10 p.m. because Jerry just doesn't sleep. I don't know how he operates, but the man is like nocturnal. But regardless, so when the block was planned out, we had like a 14-day cycle that we stuck to pretty religiously from basically January 1st. And we were basically trying to fit certain, like, you know, types of sessions within that 14-day period. So it alternated between week one would be like a Monday, Thursday, Sunday workouts, with Sunday being the long run. And then the following week would be Wednesday, Saturday. So, you know, a lot of people will follow traditional plan where like you're always working out like Tuesday, Friday, Sunday, for instance. Because of the types of sessions that we were going for, we wanted to like add a little bit of breathing room in the schedule on certain days. It also meant there were sometimes some quick turnarounds, right? Like, and Charles can speak to that. There were some Saturday hard long runs with then a quick turnaround to a Monday workout, where like we were definitely challenging them because we were pushing different sides of the spectrum. We did the long run, and then, I mean, Charles did some like relatively impressive track sessions too, just to maintain his efficiency and economy. But back to the question, what you were asking. So we knew the days we wanted to go. We generally knew the energy system that we wanted to target, or kind of like we knew what the ultimate objective was. a lot of times, Jerry and I think about training usually in those 2-week blocks. So like we know generally what paces we want, but we'll refine the prescription as the workout gets closer. So we'll be on the phone the night before talking about, okay, what is the information that we've gathered, since the last time we visited this stimulus? What updates do we need to make to our beliefs that may have emerged since, and then tweak the workout from there. We tell the athletes don't get the workout really until typically about 30 minutes before, maybe even sometimes 10 minutes before. I do think, we have the workouts, like we can send them out, but I think part of Jerry's logic there is on race day, you're walking into like uncharted territory. Like you don't know, the cards that you're holding, but you don't know the cards that anybody else is holding. And so like, you just have to respond to the field. And so I think he's just trying to, he's trying to develop, I think, the resilience and the adaptability and flexibility that comes with like kind of, taking in information on the fly and adjusting. Cause that is a lot of marathoning. That's a lot of cross country running. Charles can speak to that. So,
for sure. And I'll be the first to admit there are definitely times where Cole and I are like, man, like it'd be really nice to know like XYZ ahead of time. And, it would be nice and it'd be comfortable and be easier to plan around. But at the same time, I show up to Boston an hour before the race. I'm warming up, I don't know anybody there. I know when the gun's supposed to go off. And then I think it was literally 5 minutes before the race, you could see whispers going around the entire tent. And you're like, oh my God, people are like, something's happening. And then all of a sudden Jerry comes up to me and he's like, dude, like I'm hearing it's going to go fast. And somebody, like, he didn't tell me who. He knew who it was supposed to be, but he didn't tell me just in case it was someone different. And, gave him a telephone, like maybe information gets messed up. He just wanted me to know that all of a sudden, 5 minutes before the race, we were going to go super hard. And yeah, that's where you got to give credit where credit's due. Is I've been preparing for the unknown for the entire, every single time we had a high level performance. I never knew what it was supposed to be until right before. And so it didn't bother me at all. If anything, it was nice that Jerry gave me a heads up at all 5 minutes before the race. And so I was feeling over prepared with that much intensity under the gun. And so, yeah, I think it's one of those things where I think, good soldiers follow orders. And when you're dealing with coaches who put this much time, effort, and energy into getting you where you need to be, sometimes as the athlete, you got to take your hands off the wheel.
And in regards to that comment, did you ever question the orders? Was there ever a time where you're like, body's dead? Can we tweak the workout a little bit? Or that doesn't sound like a fun workout?
I think, like I said, I think with Jerry, it's one of the reasons I came out here all the way back when, is just that his pedigree is so incredible. There's just always a chance that there's a great chance, I'd say an outside chance, that he's thinking of something that you haven't considered. And so as an athlete, I tend to think that it's never in my best interest to push back on someone who's infinitely more experienced than I am, unless, we're having huge issues in the race that super need to be addressed. I think Jerry has never given me a reason to not trust him. And so I think he has, especially after this race, almost infinite leeway. If he says we're doing bike rides in the mountains next block, it's just, nod your head and smile. And so, yeah, I think that's just the best way to train as an athlete, is if you start to think, I think a little bit too much, especially because it's still my first year running marathons, you start to inject friction into your own training experience. That's just not only unnecessary, kind of unwarranted, because I have no experience coaching myself.
I'll just add one more thing too. I think this is like a good lesson for anyone listening. One of the best things about Charles is I think his ability to be coachable. I think that Nick Saban had a great quote, which went something like, bad athletes want to be left alone, good athletes want to be coached, and great athletes want to be told the truth. And I think Charles exhibits both of those two things between good and great athletes, which is like he wants to be coached and he wants to be told the truth. So many people, I feel like, are walking through the world or walking through a training plan feeling like I know better than anybody else. And ultimately, your body better than anybody else. But there are a lot of blind spots in athletes, like, in their vision. And I think having a coach, I'm still, obviously learning the ropes. I don't want to claim that I have decades of experience like Jerry does, but at least when you're looking at someone like who has been through so many of these training blocks, putting your faith in someone who has the reference class in the group of having seen this been done so many times, I think is just like very reassuring. And I think like if you have a choice, like if you want to position yourself as someone who buys into and believes the program, you're going to be so much better off than the athlete who positions himself as like adversarial to everything that you get as a coach. And I've seen both. And like the people who want to be coached and the people who want to listen, they always do better. Like it's a pretty simple proposition. So I think you should be incentivized to buy in and believe. So like find reasons to buy in. And I think Charles has done a great job with that.
And just one last thing too. I just really liked the told the truth thing. I do think there are things that I will push back on Jerry with, but almost exclusively it's just about my own physiological experience. And I think that there's a difference between, I'd even rephrase pushing back. There's a total difference between like resisting your coach or versus informing your coach. Like if you're like, I'm too tired, like something really bad is happening. And like I had a day where I had a GI issue. It was a long run and I just could not finish it regardless. And I saw Berg after and I saw Jerry after in the parking lot. And it was just, this is how I'm feeling. I think that if I were to try to execute what you give me today, we're going to walk away in a worse spot than if I just leave it. Ended up taking the next day off because I was still just having a ton of trouble with it. And then got right back to training, was at perfectly 100% for the entire rest of the training block, which was, I think, almost 2 months from that point, probably. And it was just one of those opportunities where I feel like if you're a coach, it's a two-way street. One, you have to have, I think, the confidence to tell your coach how you're feeling and be honest. And then also your coach has to have, I think, be in a place where they trust you as an athlete, that you're not, cutting corners, I guess, trying to get out of hard workouts. And I think when you build that relationship, that's one of the best flywheels you could possibly have, where an athlete gets better, a coach understands them better, and you start to perform better.
Alex, I remember we had a conversation not too long ago about Jerry and how people don't necessarily view him as a marathon coach. But like people very quickly forget the era of dominance from Shalane Flanagan. I mean, he literally coached in New York City marathon winner, as well as Amy Craig back in the day when she made the Olympic team alongside Shalane. Again, you were maybe in high school or college at the time, depending on which era we're talking about. 2016, how old were you? You'd have been
2016.
College?
I would have just started college. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I forget you're old, man. You're old and wise amongst this group. But like, I know you weren't coaching at that time with Jerry, but maybe you've asked him questions. What do you think has changed in terms of what has changed and what has stayed the same between his marathon philosophy when Shalane was in her dominance to now his next prodigy, Charles Hicks?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard Jerry tell stories about like the builds that Shalane would do, and obviously she was a very special athlete and did some unbelievable things. I mean, winning New York was that's the aspirational standard for any American woman right now, right, in the marathon. I think Jerry's one of his greatest skills is that he's constantly iterating. Like he has foundational principles, but like no 2 years of training will look the same, because he's kind of a little bit paranoid and he's just always turning over training ideas in his mind. And he's like, what if we tweak this? What if we tweak that? I mean, you're not going to see he's not going to resemble a totally different coach. Like he's drawing from his foundational experience. But I think the reason that's helpful is because Charles would probably be the first to say, the marathon just isn't solved right now. Like we just saw an American man run 2:05 who, with all due respect to Vincent, was kind of unknown prior to that. And we just saw 2 men break 2 hours in the marathon. We're kind of right now, probably on the next frontier of advancements that are going to be made. And I don't know if we can trace it back to any one variable. It's probably a combination of the shoe technology is very different. The fueling strategies are totally different than they were 10 years ago. That's something I've been following pretty closely. And then just the willingness, the risk tolerance has probably changed as well. So when you take the factors that you take the factors that are now that the athletes are considering, or how it's impacting their bodies, their they're reconsidering the fueling, they're reconsidering the shoes. And then you take Jerry, who's now gotten more experience and is maybe willing to push strategically in certain directions. I think we're just getting to a place where his philosophy has to change. It has to iterate. And like, he's been able to try to stay one step ahead of the curve. And I feel like we did a pretty good job of that. And we're going to have to keep doing a better job of that as a rising tide is going to lift all boats. So we're going to have to keep being creative and innovative to stay ahead here.
And I think that we're also just an interesting era. I don't really know what's changed. Maybe it's just kind of, I think people enjoy this stuff and it's fun and it helps every training group. But I think we're in a example, us being on this podcast right now, are in a new era where people, I think, have high level runners have a more open approach than they used to. Great example, watching those guys run 159. Unbelievable result. I go on Instagram the next day and their fuel plan is just there. And you can see exactly where they hit all these different fueling stations and exactly what was at every fueling station. And it was some things that we haven't even, I hadn't even heard of until I saw it was like this certain type of recovery shot, but basically just all these different things that we can now introduce into our own training, tweak, iterate on. That I think just in previous eras, it'd be really hard to disseminate that kind of information on the scale where people can just access it so easily now. It's really exciting, I think, where not just within our own training group, but other training groups as well, I think are trying all these different approaches and refusing to be complacent and starting to, I think, attack some of these barriers, Sub-2 being a great example that previously seemed impenetrable. I think, it's just kind of a very beautiful and human thing to be a part of. And I think I'm just excited for how we can contribute to it as well.
Let's take a second to talk about Vinny. I'm from Ohio. He was 4 years older than me, so I knew him in high school. I knew of him. He was a legend.
He was in the Pac-12 too.
Yeah, Pac-12, but then he went to Notre Dame. I was talking to Alex. I had coffee with Josh this morning, and he, I think loosely, but actually somewhat intently follows running. And so I was talking to him about the performance, and I talked to Vinny on the podcast yesterday. I was such a bad interviewer because I'm just still in such shock at how he ran 205. I just don't fully understand what happened. To make it crazier for both of you, the marathon he ran at was in Toledo. I grew up in Toledo, so I know the streets he ran. It's not a particularly hilly course, but it's not a fast course that you run through a metro. There was time on the clock. He disagreed with me. There was time on the clock, 100%.
For sure.
It's so confusing to me. That whole, just the sport of the marathon, even I woke up on Sunday and two guys broke 2 and I was like, damn it. Like I liked breaking 2 where there was a buildup, and I'm not to sound like a Debbie Downer or a Karen, but like, I don't know. I kind of wish there was like, what I like that Nike did, and you guys will love this because you're both associated with Nike. And it wasn't your brand who ultimately did it. Like what I liked with Nike when Kipchoge did it was there was such a massive buildup, so much like intensity going into the attempt. And so everyone watched and followed, and it was a big deal. I woke up and you refresh Instagram and it's just like, oh my gosh, 2 guys broke 2. Like, where'd this come from? And that still hasn't really set in. I don't know if I want to talk about Vinny or Sub-2 or maybe both, but just like Sunday was a bizarre day for the marathon. Even Boston was just a weird. What in your opinion, what is happening with the sport of marathon over the last month? Because just everything's shifting.
It's a phenomenal question. I think everyone's asking it right now. I think it really was that week, right? Boston to London,
to Toledo, Ohio.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I actually don't even know which one of those was first. But it is. We are in an unprecedented era. It's funny you talk about the breaking 2 attempt because I think this is kind of a branch off. But I think if you think about the R&D investment that Nike did put into taking the shoes to the next level, looking into fueling, like I wouldn't be surprised if there was a runoff effect from how much was poured into that attempt that then set us up for where we are now as marathoners. I think you saw new technologies being brought into the shoes, new training methodologies being brought into the sport. And I think my answer to why it's happening now is just like I described with my own path to the marathon. I think compared to track, things in the marathon happen over longer durations. I think they take more time to kind of fall into place and for things to kind of catch up because it's such a volume dependent pursuit. It just takes years and years, I think, to start to see these things come to fruition. And there were signs, I would say, in the lead up. I think Connor Mance, just dropping onto the scene and just, I mean, he got that American record so fast, right? Relative to I think how some people would have expected the timeline for that to be based on people's, I'd say, what would you call like the peak, maybe like mid to early 30s in the marathon. And so I think you just saw things start to accelerate a little bit faster. I mean, Kiptum ran 2:0:30. I think that was a couple years ago. And so I think it was just more that that big 2-hour one hadn't fallen. And so when people woke up, saw on Instagram someone ran 2:0:30, it didn't have the same impact of like, wow, I really thought that would take a lot more. And I think really when you think about it, it's like a 30-second move over a 26-mile race. It's just the way things are headed. I think we're maybe not prepared for where they might end up. We might look back on this era right now and be like, if it's anything like the sub-4 mile, there's probably still a pretty long way to go. And I think this is just where it's all going to start.
Is it crazy to you, Charles, to perhaps think you break 2 hours in your lifetime? I wouldn't have said that a month ago, but
I wouldn't have said it a week ago or a week and a bit ago at this point. I mean, I've had a bunch of people obviously bring that up to me in the past week. And, I think the joke being that if I continue on this trajectory, my next race should be sub-2. I don't think it's going to happen quite that way, but I think it's really beautiful to me because the breaking 2 attempt was the reason why I got into marathoning. I was a freshman in college when that happened. And like Berg said, I think very quickly after that in 2020, I had a big perspective shift on how I wanted to approach this sport. And I think how incredible of a production and how incredible of an achievement that was at the time really, I think, changed the reverence that I have for this sport and this pursuit. And so I think the fact that it's even possible or being discussed is just going to help me kind of pursue this to an even higher level. Because I think every time I perform better at running, I try to give back to it in terms of the process of, I'm so grateful to be here and previous versions of me have put in so much that we'll never get to experience. The zone that I'm in right now, is present Charles. And so I think that I'm just going to try to continue to invest in myself, financially, in terms of effort, in terms of, I think just kind of how I continue to build my life, interwoven with this sport. And if sub-2 happens because of that, then that'll just be obviously an incredible moment for me.
Yeah. I don't have too much more to add than what Charles just said, but one thing I did want to hit on is it's been really cool to follow the developmental arc of Charles, even over the course of the past 8 to 12 months, because I think it went from this place of like naivete in a beneficial way, like just going into New York and you didn't know what you didn't know, right? Like, and you were just willing to go in and be challenged and be open-minded. And I think that was a great way to start. And then even just seeing the shift over the past 4 to 5 months where like, it's so easy to go in with imposter syndrome and to be like, do I really belong here yet? But like, I feel like the way you ran in Boston, you really were owning your seat and you were trusting yourself. I think you'd said afterwards, like, if you know you're super fit, then you have to run like you're super fit. And it's like, it's a remark that like you can probably just gloss over. But another thing you've mentioned, right, is the difference between confidence and arrogance is evidence. And you now have evidence that you are a 204 guy. And I think the downstream implications of that for every time that you toe the line, like you can run 26.2 miles at around 4:45 pace. And I think the like you've transitioned away from the naivete, and now like you're getting to a place where you're like, okay, I belong here. I can own my seat in this championship type of field. And just for the crowd to know, like Charles wasn't even part of the Boston press conference beforehand, right? Like no one was even like, he wasn't on the radar. And I can assure you that's probably never going to happen again. We're going to have to plan around your travel for future marathons, Charles, because you're going to be asked to come way in advance. But
I was in a sweet spot head again, but yeah, my agents have told me that is going to be difficult to replicate. But yeah, I think that's one of the best and worst things about this sport, depending on your perspective, is that race results are cached forever. So, once you run it, you have that for the rest of your life. If I retired today, I'd still be, retiring a 204 guy. I won't do that because I happen to love this sport and I want to be in it as long as it'll have me. But I think that's the real difference is I no longer have to think about a time like that as delusional, because I think it's just you have cautionary mechanisms to protect yourself as an athlete. You don't want to get carried away just because, I don't want to start a marathon and sub 4 mile pace. There's obviously is a range of safe.
Dude, you never know. NCAA cross country tactics could be brought to the marathon soon.
Exactly. I wouldn't rule it out at this point, a couple of years from now. But I do think that's kind of the psychological mechanism at play is that you have a governor in your head to keep you out of trouble. And now I can update that, 204 being something that's achievable. There's a lot more of a fun zone now that I can attack and not have that nagging sense of delusion,
How do you both feel taking a step out, both as coach and athlete, or maybe stay in those roles, but putting on the fan cap for a second or just perspective of the sport? Like marathoning is so interesting. Connor got injured at the worst time. He, when he was in the sport running marathons, he was like top of the game. And then he's out for a couple of weeks. All of a sudden you got new 204, 205 guys, multiple of them. And then even this Vinny guy, like Charles, you were probably feeling on top of the world. And then this kid who I'm sure you had heard his name before, but in no large capacity, I even said to him, like bluntly, like you were kind of ran mediocre times in college, like 13:34 for the 5K is not equivalent to a 205:54, let alone, I mean, I don't know if you guys saw these statistics, but I think he won the race by 13 minutes. He soloed the whole thing. I mean, nothing about that performance makes sense to me. And I told him just as a storyteller propping up the sport, it's like, Charles, you ran faster, but the guy soloed the race in a random ass city that I only know of because I grew up there. And again, debate me if you guys want to. I actually think Boston's quite a fast course. I think it's gotten this perspective as a slow course because of the hills. There's a reason it's not record eligible. I think if you get good weather, it's a fast course. So it's like, he ran 205 solo and on like a not too hilly of a course, but like I wouldn't call it a Chicago type course. And all these storylines are converging about a year and a half before trials. And I don't know how do you guys feel about like just the I don't remember at least men's marathoning specifically in the US ever being this exciting. Granted, I haven't been on this earth very long, but even as I study the history books.
Yeah. And I'd say that's one of the most exciting things about this recent shift, because I don't think you even went through how across the board in Boston, the US times were just historic. There's so many more 205s than we'd ever seen before. There was, doubling the amount of 204s we'd ever seen before. And then the first 203 we'd ever seen before. And that was just off of Boston. Then you throw Vincent on in the 205 range. And I think you start to paint this picture that hindsight's 2020, but I did, I think claim a while ago, I wonder if I ever said it on a podcast or something, which is just that I think that American marathoning was not where it needed to be. I think if you look at track performances as just any indication of what Americans are capable of in the distance running scene, you started seeing medals nonstop at the Olympics. You started seeing golds at the Olympics and World Championships, which hadn't been seen in a long time. And I don't think you can extrapolate exactly those level of performances to the marathon, but I think based on where things were at and how long there've been, and still is of a deficit on the podium on the major scene, I think it was just, to me, it implied that there was a market gap potentially that was worth analyzing and seeing if we threw enough resources and effort and talent and good training situations at it, what would happen. I think that was just kind of the central question of why, we wanted to give it a go. And so across the board, I'm just so stoked. I think a lot of people are asking a similar question to me. And I think a lot of people who are already running the marathon are now lifting themselves up to higher standards than we've ever seen before. And I think the technology is coming along at exactly the right time too. And just kind of elevating, I think, the level that you can train at while getting this kind of volume in. And then also just kind of the Mexican standoff of we're all now standing here running insane times and heading into LA, which encroaches, a day closer, regardless of how we all feel about it. And so I think you set up what I'm kind of describing as a tinderbox where really exciting things can happen. And I think that, truth be told, I don't think we're even close to kind of the limit of what we can do.
Ed, real quick, if I might add, because Alex, I'm sure you have thoughts, but in the newsletter piece that you write about this 204 marathon, you quote this just excellent podcast. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. It's called The Running Effect. And you quote Charles. Charles, apparently you went on it. So I'll have to go take a listen to that episode. But you said on that podcast, you said, if you're worried about making teams, you're not going to be winning medals. And I remember when you said that, Charles, it really stuck out to me. Alex, it obviously stuck out enough to you to put in a newsletter piece like this one, where it's like, yeah, I feel like for so long as Americans, just because our country is so freaking massive and there is such competition and depth, it's like we focused on everyone just within our borders. But I think there have been a few guys, Conor Mann's being one of them, who have done well enough and competed well enough. And it's kind of set the standard for Alex, you could speak to this with other Bowerman or whatever you guys call yourself these days, Swoosh, TC, Eugene athletes. The glory days, Grant Fisher, Mohamed, like those guys back in the day, like they could, not that they could care less about a US title, but it was a means to the end of getting to the championship to then medal. And I feel like for so long in the marathon, it's been like, can you be top American? And now it's like, no, can you get on the podium? Can you potentially win a marathon? And I remember feeling that with Boston this year with just McLean, with how well she's been running, and can she get on the podium? It's like, at this point, I don't really care if she can be the top American. I know she can be the top American. And I think she feels similarly.
Yeah. I mean, Charles, go ahead. You take it first.
I was just, I think that it's funny because when I said that quote way back when, it didn't stand out to me at all. But I think what did stand out to me a while ago, I think it was in college. I can't remember when I came across it, but it was essentially some piece of content, could have been a TikTok, could have been an Instagram reel, whatever, that was centering in on the idea of, if not me, then who, right? Like the fact that I think to take a crack at any pursuit of any difficulty, you have to have an element of ego where you essentially insert yourself into that situation that hasn't even happened yet. It's a hilariously, I think, egotistical idea to have. But at the same time, I think the way that I balance that out in my brain is that, I only have one existence, right? And if I have the opportunity to potentially contribute to something like that I feel passionately about, then if I don't, with all these cards, that I'm holding that I think would give me a really good shot at it, then who's going to do it? And I think that is kind of the central thought that powers all these other thoughts that are like, if I'm going to be worrying about just making teams and not really trying to, I think, aim for what some would consider to be, maybe an egotistical goal, then I'm just going to hold myself back. And I think that the best way I can contribute to this new era of, I think, American distance running is by being, the most outlandish version of myself and taking as big of a swing as I possibly can. And, if it's not me, then it'll be someone else, but I'm going to put myself in a position where, it possibly could be.
And the question that I think about as a coach is how do you do that, right? And I think what Charles exhibits is that, he's a perfect case study here about how, winners and losers all have the same goals, right? Everyone wants to be on an Olympic team. Everyone wants to run the fastest American marathon ever, right? And I think what it comes down to is you don't always get what you strive for, but you do get what you settle for. And I think that's what I take away from Charles's quote about where are you setting your reference point? Your expectations are going to shape your reality. So many people in life are just trying to get through with minimal effort, and they want to survive and advance. And I think what Charles has done is he doesn't make downward comparisons to look at who did I beat. He's only looking upwards, right? He's who do I still have to go get? And there's fewer and fewer right now that are up there, but he's setting a standard that's forcing growth. And I think that ultimately, your life is going to always bend towards what you accept as your standard of excellence. We don't have a lot of time left, I know, but Charles, I think, is another great case study of someone who recognizes that you can't live an ordinary life and expect to get extraordinary results. Every single thing that he does is filtered through one lens, which is this going to make me faster? If the answer is no, it's not going to happen. He's not going to do it. Like, this is why he's talking to us from, it is turned off right now because he's in his break, but that's why he's talking to us from a pressurized altitude canopy in his room, right? Like, I don't know how many people have the mental capacity or the sanity to be able to put in 16 plus hours a day in an enclosed space. Like, but Jerry says it all the time, and I think it pisses some people off, but it takes what it takes, right? And I think Charles, you recognize that.
Charles, kind of off of what you're saying, the confidence aspect, to plug episode I released this morning, Dream Guest, I had Matthew Centrowitz on the podcast, and the quote I had for that graphic, I loved it. We were talking about sort of like becoming the person who you say you are. And he said, it's one thing to write things down on a mirror. And we're referencing like the kids or the people who write like Olympian on their mirror. So he said, it's one thing to write things down on a mirror. The idea is having more repetitions of saying it to yourself, because the more you say it, the more you actually believe it. What really matters is convincing yourself that you don't even have to convince yourself later. On race day, it's gold. It's not even up for question. It's not even you hesitating while saying it.
Oh, yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that, because the first thought that came through my mind was when I thought, I was like, writing on the mirror. Like, why would you write it on the mirror? Because I did see people who would do that with goals growing up. And I think what always confused me is that I don't think my goals ever escape my consciousness. I think if anything, it's like imagining like Google glasses or like, some like VR glasses where you just got them hovering just at least in my peripheral, at least 24/7. And it's not like I would say that I'm haunted by it as much as it excites me. I think if I were to amend a single thing that Berg has said on this podcast, is that I don't feel like I ever have to go get people ahead of me. I feel like I get to, I feel like it's really just a miracle, to be honest, that not only am I able to do these things, but that there's so many people and, even corporations that are excited about helping me, and I think in a lot of ways it can feel like running can feel like a very, I think, selfish pursuit because of how much internal reflection is required to do it at a high level. But I think I just try to channel what so many people have poured into, Berg being a phenomenal example of just, I think I'm the one that gets to go across the finish line and enjoy that moment. And to me, it's a million little miracles that other people are willing to help me have that experience. And so it's really just not that hard, I think, to hold myself accountable when other people are willing to invest themselves and never enjoy that exact moment.
What, as we wrap up, a story, biggest surprise moment from this block, biggest learning, anything of the sort? Both of you go.
Okay. I got one, and this is, I'll quote a text from Charles. I think this one really stood out to me, and I already alluded to it earlier in the podcast, but I think if you can stay rational when other people are getting emotional around you, you're going to have an enormous edge. There's a quote from Eisenhower, which is that the definition of a military genius is the ability to do the average thing when everyone else around you is losing their mind. And I think that Charles had texted me after Atlanta, and obviously this was like a subpar race for him that came with some disappointment. And he said, quote, "I will rely on the confidence that I will navigate my failure points more effectively than my competition. We're all going to encounter similar obstacles, just at different times. They're not setbacks, just part of the job. We all have to charge it to the game," which I love, right? Like, you have to price in that difficulty, because you're always going to have moments in a training block where your expectations and reality are going to collide. And a lot of people are going to freak out. A lot of people are going to want to like jump ship or like totally like rewrite the plan. But I think your ability to just have a steady hand on the wheel and be able to press forward with steadfast optimism is a major competitive advantage. And so that's one of the biggest things I take away from this block for sure.
Yeah. And I think that building off of that is just a similar thought process. I think it's an investing term where you just should never chase your losses. I think, as an athlete, I think, we're all going to make mistakes, and sometimes they have absolutely nothing to do with decisions you made. Like, I have trouble eating dairy, and, sometimes you can ask, is there dairy in this thing? And it's not, you're not always going to hit, and so sometimes that it's just like life can throw little curveballs at you, and sometimes it throws big ones at you. But regardless of what you're dealing with, I think to try to chase your losses and try to, inject more anxiety to cure an anxious situation is never going to be in your best interest. And so I think what I really try to do is think passionately when it's positive for me, and think logically when I'm trying to manage the downsides of passion sometimes. And I think that's going to be the way that I continue to kind of apply my analytical process to this sport while trying to enjoy it as much as possible.
Man, look at Alex over here. Alex smirks with your one-liners like a proud father when he knows it's a single quote.
I'm gonna be writing those down myself. Yeah, I mean, Charles just spitting wisdom. I love it.
I know, smart guy. 2 Stanford grads and 1 guy they rejected. Trying to make my way in this world.
You're spiritually alumni.
Hopefully. I mean, Alex, you can speak to this. I think I'm probably on the outside of most connected to Stanford as someone who's never been to Stanford. I'll take that.
You've turned out just fine in life. Yeah,
I've tried to. Final question for you both. Obviously, Charles, you jokingly said the quote of like, see if the training's for nothing if it doesn't go well. And it's rare in the sport to have these like seemingly everything goes right performances. You have had 2 in recent memory, so we'll just give credit to your coach on this call for being an excellent coach. But kind of besides the point, like it's rare to have these, breakthrough performances all the time when literally everything goes according to plan and you run a time faster than you could have, imagined on the day, even in an A+ scenario. So both from the perspective of coach back in Eugene, coaching the rest of the team, probably watching from afar, and then athlete running the race, in 2 or 3 sentences each, what does it mean to execute on the day and have all the hard work? Obviously, Charles, you're doing the work. Alex, you're coaching, you're instructing, leadership, have the work pay off and have, a moment become remarkably special that even if you both retired, you guys would have with you till the day you die.
Yeah, I can take a quick stab at that. First of all, I just want to set the record straight. There's a quote in Hayward Field that Charles and I will walk by all the times from Bill Bowerman. He says, the coach doesn't make the athlete makes himself, or something along those lines. And so I think any great athlete can make a coach look good. So I think Charles obviously deserves the lion's share of the credit. I like to be the GPS unit. That's what I say to people, right? Like I'm just here to identify hazards and potentially suggest some course corrections. But the credit, I need to give credit where credit is due. It's a phenomenal athlete. The athletes really deserve the credit. I think it's difficult as a coach because I watch Boston with a lot of anxiety because all the things that can go wrong. I mean, this is a high risk, high reward endeavor. The same traits that bring athletes to the top are the same ones that push them over the edge. And so I kind of view myself as a risk manager. And so when things go well, it's almost just like a sigh of relief, then followed by excitement, because you think of all the variables that have to converge and align correctly on the day. It's almost overwhelming to consider. But I also think that when you've had now 2 performances, you're not dealing with an anomaly anymore. You're dealing with a trend. So is it possible we might be chasing this time for a little bit because we don't have the ideal conditions or we don't have the ideal setup? Sure. But I like to praise effort and I like to praise execution. And so there's going to be other variables we can define. But I also have a sneaking suspicion there's going to be a day when Charles runs faster than he did in Boston. And I hope we can keep just taking chunks of time off of that as we keep moving forward.
And Charles, before you go, Alex, I think it's from a rap song. I forget if it's Drake or Jack Harlow. I think it was one of the 2. But they had this great line. They said, I thought it was luck till I did it again. And I've very much felt that in my life. You do something once that's so outlandish, like for me, making Spotify's charts, I'm like, this has to be a fluke. Like the names of podcasts I'm beating, there's no way logically this doesn't make sense. And then you don't get back on for a little while and you're like, it was totally luck. And then you do it again and you're like, nope, wasn't luck, so.
Right. 100%.
Well, and I think what that touches on is just that any high level pursuit is a tightrope walk where instead of you walking across it, you're carrying your ego, right? And the higher up you go, the more flights you have beneath you to fall. But great tightrope walkers, they're not even aware that they're walking across 2 buildings, right? Like they are so zoned in and they're so honed in on their process that, it's just like walking across the kitchen to grab, a coffee. I think that that's kind of the lesson for me is that regardless of the feats that I accomplish, I think that the approach should be informed by it. But if I allow myself to get consumed by it, then it's just going to be, that's where you inject those stressors that make you feel like a bit of an imposter. And so I'd say if there were three things I'd want to do coming off of any good races, I think the first thing is you want to affirm the past. Then I think you want to appreciate the present, and enjoy the moment, and then inject ambition into the future. And so you have 3 A's there. You affirm, appreciate, and be a little more ambitious. And that's what I want to take away from this. And that way I get to kind of, I think, appreciate, enjoy this kind of window as much as possible without, letting some of these highs, I think, get to me.
You both are excellent. Thank you so much for taking the time to break it down. This was a ton of fun. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Charles, congrats on the 204. Long time coming. Not surprised whatsoever. Honestly, I don't know if it's just because I follow you very closely on social media as a friend and follower and supporter. Tap that like button regardless of what the content is, whether you see it or not. That's the true sign of a friend. But the block went so well. I'm honestly not that shocked by the 204. So maybe you guys need to come to me before and I'll be like 159. It's easy work. Grain it into your subconscious. But all notes aside, thank you guys so much. Thanks for the wisdom, all the ways you guys contribute to the sport on and off the not track roads now.
Nice save. Thank you for having us.